Throughout my practice and collaboration with ants, I always find myself immersed in what I call these techno-ecologies. In other words, I find myself confronting the immanent social force of imitation, resemblance, the imitation of natural algorithms, forms and behavior, sounds. This is, by the way, the sound of the leafcutter ants, produced by their stridulating organ. It's called stridulation. Many insects produce stridulation, and I made a record out of this. I'm giving it away here. You have to perform for me. I'm interested in this social force of imitation because at the end, what I discovered with ants is that it's not that they look like, or they act, or they behave like humans do, but it's the other way around. And not even human beings, but technology. The technology we create, for me, it's very similar and behaves, decentralized networks, for instance, behaves chaotically sometimes. They are out of control, and that's what I'm interested in exploring. And by that means, I'm trying to find different ways of the meaning of what is to be social. Because technology at the end is an aid for us to become more social, or aid in being interconnected. That's totally different. And that's where I came and focused on many theories based on French theories, basically Gabriel Tarde and Roger Queloz, which tackle on the subject of mimicry as a form of play, that's Queloz. And on the other hand, Gabriel Tarde talks about the social as an immanent force, which is always present and is always there. No matter in nature or in the human nature, there's always the social. And this social, it's being imitated, it's being passed on, it's being reflected, it's being observed. We copy behaviors, we imitate those models that we think or that influences us. And I think technology does the same. And that's the connection with ants. And that's my introduction to my work. It's all about ant mimicry. So if you hear the sound, and I didn't tell you that this comes from an ant, what does it sound to you? It might be, I don't know, just, clicking your nails and doing this, or it might be just, the transmission of a broken modem, or sending a fax. I'm just saying there are many sounds that to our subjective way of hearing may reveal certain ideas or certain concepts of the things that we are used to hear in an everyday process. And I think on the subjective level, working with ants, it's very interesting, more than on the objective level, and more than seeing them as a species to resemble their model, or to copy their model, or to study them, or to control them, but rather let them be and try to establish this collaboration with them, or try to see them from different perspectives, not as insects, but rather as social beings, because that's what they are. And this is interesting because ant mimicry is actually a subject, a scientific term. It's called mimicrophilia. And many insects resemble form, behavior, and chemical communication of ants. So, this is a vial, stridulation amplifier. So there are 3 perceptive fields which I designed from my research with ants, especially leafcutter ants. You see, there are many ants that produce these acoustic vibrations for the communications in the whole world. But one of the most studied ones are the tropical ants and the leafcutter ants. Not all ants produce this sound. There are ants that, for instance, the native European wood ants of the forests of the Great Britain, which you have a lot of very beautiful ants here, creates this anthill. They use their abdomen to communicate and to create an alarm signal when they are needing recruitment. But they use the gas of the abdomen and they drum it against the walls of the nest. Whereas the leafcutter ants, they have a special organ. And with this organ, it turns this leafcutter ant in a contextual, very modular social being, which can use pheromones, of course, which is the semiochemical language all ants use mainly. They can use the stridulation, the acoustic vibrations that are transmitted over the substrate or over a material which is able to transmit vibrations, because at the end these ants don't hear like we hear, they just feel, and they just feel these vibrations with their legs, like spiders do and many other insects. So there is an attraction field at the beginning when ants communicate with each other individually, one-to-one, which is emitted by means of either stridulations, transmitting over a material, maybe a leaf, maybe even artificial materials at home. They can be produced. We have many things that vibrate and resonate. Anything that is able to resonate vibrations can be used when you have an ant there, and you can amplify by using piezo microphones or contact microphones. So basically there's an attraction field combined, pheromones and stridulation, and there's an excitation field when the ant starts reaching the beacon of the sound, or when it releases the pheromones, it's this atmosphere of smell. And the third field would be the contact field when the ants start antenating. Basically, the antenna is they're like our noses, and basically they start reading or decoding which is the subject in front of them, and they start communicating. So this is what ignites my passion for ants. My ant-mediated practice explores the difference and similarities based on the complicated relations between ants and humans. I mean, I can talk about this in other, I talk about this also in other presentations, but I'm going to have a brief showcase of my work. I'm talking about the way we sometimes see ants as pests, because ants have become invasive in the world. Of course, we have native ants in Europe, or wherever you come from, you have your native ants. Ants that have always evolved in that environment, but due to our commerce and global commercialization and traveling around, you bring species from this place to another, and ants are one of the most successful in adapting in different environments. In fact, ants are, of course, I love ants and I'm going to say this, there are many species in the world that should have bear the title of being the future of the world after we're gone, but among rats and ants, maybe all the fusariums and all the bacteria, the ants will be there, definitely. This is my latest work. It's been on show in Vilnius, in the National Art Gallery. It's called Thermotaxis, and it's based on this fascinating social thermoregulation of wood ants. So European wood ants, how do they survive winter? They are able to survive winter because they have a collaboration with microorganisms that live in this anthill that some of you might have seen in the forest, strolling around the European forest. And in the inside the architecture, they are also hosting around 50 species of different insects. Most of them are flies, earthworms, and caterpillars of butterflies, which hibernate inside. And all these multi-species tolerance turns this anthill of the European wood ant in a hotspot for winter. They are able to be guests of the ants because all these different insects have managed to hack the communication system or treat the ant in one way or another, which has to do also with ant mimicry, knowing how to imitate an ant in order to be accepted. And what I do in thermotaxis is basically I use a thermal imaging sensor, which is running in open source in Raspberry Pi, and I'm doing a live image of the thermal, basically the infrared wave of the thermal being emitted from the anthill. The anthill inside is actually in a hibernating chamber, which is running a self-regulated cooling system, because you don't want to wake up the ants. The ants need to metabolize over winter, so that in spring all the young workers that were born in summer could produce these special glands, these special secretions from the special glands of the wood ant, that is the special food for the queens. So without this hibernation, the ants won't have a chance to reproduce the next spring and summer. So it's important that they sleep, but it's also important that they don't die in the harsh conditions, so that's why they have this social thermoregulation. And what I do is I use this live thermal image to create a soundscape, a live soundscape based on computer vision. Of course, the whole setup has to do a lot. This used to be a Soviet building, so that actually before becoming an art gallery, it was actually a Soviet building for space development or research. So the whole idea was to turn this into kind of like a chamber, intimate chamber of ants coming from other world, but having the same things, sharing the same passion for heat in winter as we do. Another project I'm working on still, because it's a long development, which started actually with funding from Arts Catalyst for the pre-research phase. It's called Antibiotica, and it's about pseudonocardia, streptomyces, that produce bacteria that live in the gut of the leafcutter ants and produce antibiotics. Antibiotics, which is an area nowadays that it's increasingly being researched to find more or different sources for antibiotics to challenge or to keep up with the pace with the AVR, the antibiotic resistance in the world, which is a great major health issue. And it so happens that the ants have developed a model because these leafcutter ants are actually pharmacists and farmers, and in order for them to cope with the weeds, the fungal weeds that they cultivate in their fungal nest. So, in parentheses, leafcutter ants, they cut leaves, right? Probably you know this, but they cut leaves not for themselves, but to feed the fungus. The fungus is actually the brain of the colony, the stomach of the colony, more than the brain. It's what feeds the young larvae. When they cultivate the fungus with these leaves, it grows and it produces. But the fungus is very susceptible to attacks of the different fungal weeds. So it happens that they have certain of a cancer inside the fungal nest, Leucoprinus congylophilus. In order to keep this at bay, they don't eliminate it completely with their antibiotics, the microorganisms that produce antibiotics on the ant, but they keep it at bay. So whenever the ants are not pruning their fungal nest, this Escobopsis, it's called. It's a fungal that starts eating their own nest. And this is an SEM image, scanning electron microscope image of the glands of the leafcutter and Acromyrmex of spinosus, which produces, now it's crystallized because the ant, of course, it was being treated and it's now dead specimen, and it's the crystallized gland secretion of the antibiotic-producing organisms. But the interesting part about what I'm interested in with Antibiotica is not just finding, a new antibiotic, which has been done already, actually, by a couple of labs here in the UK and the United States as well. Candicidin, for instance, is an antibiotic element that battles or keeps Candida albicans, which is a disease for the skin, for people that have very weak immune systems. Candicidin is produced by one of the 20 microorganisms that live in the leafcutter ants, but they also have other bacteria that live in the gut, of course, like we do. So for me, it's interesting to find out if there are parasites in the leafcutter ant colony, and they manage to do so for 150 million years. They have evolved socially for longer than we do. For longer, they started inventing agriculture before we started inventing agriculture, and they started collecting these bacteria from the rainforest or from their natural habitat. And there is a difference. There should be a difference too in the way we see parasites and the way we see bacteria, something that is, or even the antibiotic resistant issue should be tackled in a different way. In the way the ants work, they don't apply this single antibiotic approach. They have many different antibiotic-producing organisms, and they apply a multi-drug approach. And then there's a connection with partner choice and part of the feedback, meaning, or on the game theory perspective, which one choose who and for what, who started the association, what for, who gains in the association in the mutualism. I think parasites are necessary for life to exist, that's the point. So very nice images of the different bacteria which are contaminating. It's called the necrobiome because the ants were dead when they did the SEMs. In the Advanced Center for Microscopy in Michigan. This is another recent work which is a collaboration with a very talented Chinese artist, friend of mine, also based in Cologne. It's called The Inexorable Colonization of the Self. And it also touches this aspect of the microbiome. So for me, if there is a way to understand the social beings, it's by the microbiome. But we didn't go much into lab work or cultivation of different bacteria. It was more the aesthetical metaphor. So we created an animation based with Chinese ink, classical drawings, and we have one of the youngest leafcutter colony that I keep in my studio as the subject to be observed in the way they work in their fungus nest. You have a better picture here. This is the nest, the fungus nest, which they feed with the leaves. Now it looks completely different, of course. So if you apply a time lapse actually to the fungal, which I don't have now either, but which pretty much will look like Physarum polycephalum. I mean, growth in nature and material growth and natural growth for me in terms of time lapse is beautiful because you can see all these dendrites or filaments or networks or extensions, how everything pulsates life because it doesn't just grow, it just pulsates. This is another very interesting work which I do actually in the different, it's actually a live performance where I do visuals of the many video collection I have with ants. So I have a huge video collection of my own, and a collection of different videos that includes ants in films and in culture and everything. And I invite guitar musicians to imitate that stridulation sound that you heard before with the guitar. Because at the end, it's interesting, the stridulation organ, and it's called plectrum, because actually, the organ of the ant that produces this sound, it has an active part and a passive part. The active being the plectrum, it's called plectrum, and the passive being the pars stridulans, which is very similar to the turntable grooves, which is also another project I have. And the guitars play electric guitar, because you need a plectrum to play, and you can imitate these sounds. So I play basically, I invite different guitar players to do this show with me. This is a very complex project because I can only explain in Spanish, but it has to do with the connection of how ants work in the fields. For ants, for instance, in elite groups when they collect, they don't all go to the same tree to cut the leaves, but they go to different places. So they are organized in a way, similar way that our ancestors in South America used to work the fields. So it was it's basically a work to try to reactivate our archaeological technology. Because before the colonization, before the Incas, we had a rich connection with the cosmos. So we decided with this, it's also a cooperation with Gabriel Vanegas, who's an experimental anthropologist, and we showed this only in Quito in Ecuador. It was commissioned by the Museum of Art there. And it's about this object, which is called Yupana, which is a calculator. So we use the ants to live there and navigate there, and we use a motion tracking to follow the calculations that they used to do, because usually our ancestors, or back then, used this to calculate the calendar, when it's going to rain, when it's going to be the sun, in order to work on the fields, on the land. And they were using, it's like a game board, they were using mice, corn pellets or different stones, and in every cell they will have numbers from tens, decimals to the hundreds, to the thousands, so they could calculate the future of when it's going to rain in years to come. So it's fascinating, and they have their own register system, so it's a very experimental project that was shown there. The ants were brought there to the museum and brought back to the habitat, of course, which is one of the interesting things when you work with ants that you don't keep. I have my own ant colony in my studio, which of course I cannot just send them back. They live already 5 years, going to be 5 years in 8 months next month, and they keep growing. Sometimes they don't grow that much over the summer. But if you work in the tropics or have such projects in South America, you're not going to bring the ants back there. You're going to go and collect them from the field, and you have the compromise to bring them back there. Of course, you don't just let them be there. These are other collaborations, which at the end, I'm showing a couple of projects that were a product of collaborations, because I really, by working with ants, you, of course, I mean, you are an artist, you have your ego, you have your ideas, and sometimes it doesn't match with other artists, but at the end, it's such a beautiful project if you start keep your egos aside and try to sacrifice a little bit of your ideas and try to mutually cooperate with some other artists. So this is another cooperation with Alyosha, which is a Russian-based artist in Germany, in Düsseldorf. And he created this sculpture, and we just connected one of my ant colonies to this lab structures that they inhabited. Of course, very aesthetic. There was not much science behind it, but the aesthetic did it. And describe it visually the way we humans work in our everyday life. So, thank you very much.